up of our hands as the evening sacrifice. Joyous light of glory of the immortal Father, heavenly, holy, blessed Jesus Christ, we have come to the setting of the sun, and we look to the evening light. We sing to God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You are worthy of being praised with pure voices forever. O Son of God, O Giver of life, the universe proclaims your glory. Almighty and ever-living God, you make us both to will and to do those things that are good and acceptable in your sight. Let your fatherly hand ever guide us, and your Holy Spirit ever be with us to direct us in the knowledge and obedience of your word, that we may obtain everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. So I'm going to give you the floor to start, Jim. If you would just kind of summarize for us what you folks did in the last couple of weeks and how that has impacted any of you. Others can speak up as well, but I'm just going to let you take the floor about that, okay?
Basically, we just would start off, and lots of times we'd end up going over about how this is happening in the modern world and how it compared to things that were listed, among the Israelites.
I need you to speak up, Jim. I'm sorry.
We said that we would start off on a lot of the stuff that we were looking at.
Sure.
We could see parallels in today's world and how it was affecting things.
Fantastic, yeah.
And then it would be off to the races.
Yeah, that's the way it should be. The Bible is not only a guide, it is a good discussion starter, and there are things about it, as you were saying, that are remarkably parallel to the life that we're living today. Not much, in some respects, not much has changed in, 3,000 years? Crazy. I mean, it's really crazy. When you think about what the patriarchs went through and what, for example, the children of Israel went through as they were wandering in this wasteland for 40 years, and then they get set up to actually go into the Holy Land, and then they get all these rules and regs again, but it's the context that they're in, the Midianites, the Ammonites, the Perizzites, you name them. There's just a whole bunch of these people occupying this territory. And they are worshiping all sorts of weird gods, and things are going on around them that are not beneficial to the people of Israel. So God is giving them a different set of rules that they need to adhere to. And he wants to purge them, if possible, of all these influences of the surrounding peoples that were living in the land when they came into it. These weird gods that they were worshiping are still being worshiped today in many ways, are they not? The sun and the moon.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me how coincidences occur. But I was reading the Wall Street Journal today about a cartoon, and it's about a woman that has a child with Satan. And this is on TV for kids to watch.
Yeah.
Danny DeVito voices one of the characters.
Oh, my
his
Lord.
daughter voices another character, and they're portraying this to kids.
Wow.
But I started thinking about that. I was thinking about all the other shows I've seen where Satan is presented as a good guy.
Yeah.
And there's been quite a few. I started going back, and there's actually been about a half a dozen.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting
Yeah.
that the mass media pushes this stuff. And we were talking about some of the other stuff that gets pushed.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. I was like, I never heard of this show.
Well, they're obviously I don't know if it's clever or not, but it's effective, sadly. They're trying to undermine our religious views, our values, our faith. And they're doing it subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, through the media.
Yeah.
Because people are glued to, sadly, the television. I wish they spent less time with the television, but they don't. And what's the number one babysitter out there? TV, basically. And so they have an audience ready for them. And the other thing about that, Jim and others, is that parents don't go to church themselves. They don't have a faith life to share with their children, much less enforce the viewing habits of the kids. So the parents are, at the very least, detached, lackadaisical, or what have you, and at the worst, they're buying into this stuff. And that's what we live with today. So that's what they've been living with for the last 3,000 years. That's what we've got.
One of the things I was reading the other day that's another coincidence is when we talk about mass media, one of the things I've always said, if I ever got into political office.
I'm sorry, the
I
volume's
would get into political office.
Yeah,
It would be that nobody under the age of 18 would be allowed to be on social media, period.
yeah,
No ifs, ands, or buts. You're not allowed on it. A judge in the United Kingdom ruled the other day that Google and the others were responsible for a girl committing suicide because they allow people to post hateful messages.
yeah,
Now, it's very interesting that YouTube will pull all kinds of stuff off that they don't agree with politically, and Google will too. But what do they allow to go on?
right,
Is people getting on there and going, well, you're fat, or you're ugly, or we all hate you because you're ugly and evil, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they won't do anything about it.
right.
Freedom
It's a
of
one-sided, it's certainly a one-sided issue.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm wondering how many of these suicides of all
Yeah.
these younger people we've seen, especially with the drugs that are available.
I hear you.
If it's not because of constant belittlement
Yeah,
on social media.
yeah. Well, I think there's.
But I see kids with 3 years old.
Yeah.
3 years old, they barely walk and they got a phone. I mean, like, what parent gives their kid a 3-year-old?
Like I said, they're not parents. That's another thing. The concept of parent is completely redefined in this society right now. And we saw it happening. I'm sure all of us here have seen it happening as we grew up, and we started seeing kids who became parents who really weren't parenting. They're farming out the parenting responsibilities to everybody else with Hillary's famous, it takes a community to raise a child. Come on, it starts with the family. And that's the one thing they're trying to get rid of right now. So anyway, we live in a hostile environment. We live with enemies surrounding us. Our question is the same question that, and again, I keep going back to pastor rather than Deuteronomy. The question is, whom shall you serve? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And we have to be adamant about that. We have to be very forthright and outspoken about that. And because we're being drowned out by a lot of other media.
I was interested that the Jewish school in New York
Yeah. Oh, that's a perfect example.
said, we're fine.
Yeah.
We're not going to have any club.
Right. And today's Wall Street Journal, AOC and her crew, and I would like the way they ended the article was, not one of them was Jewish, much less Orthodox Jew, and they're all advocating that this very Orthodox university, was a yeshiva, was not allowing the LGBTQRSC, whatever, to have a functioning organization on campus. Sorry, take it off campus if that's where you're going to go. We're not going to give you the time or the place. And it seems so reasonable to an average person that, okay, if you're here and you have signed on to learn this stuff, then you're going to go by their rules. Instead, they want you to undermine it. They want you to join it and then I like the word here, transform it. That's the favorite word today in our society. No. I applaud them for hanging tough, and I hope they never have to give in. They're a private organization. I can't imagine.
It's like anything about Iran's morality.
Iran's what?
Iran's morality police
Yes.
killing women.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically, I think the riots or protests so far resulted in the deaths of over 60 people. The Iranian secret police have been told shoot to kill.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, but since the so-called, what was it, the Muslim Revolution or what have you, when they threw out the Shah in 1979, I remember that period so clearly. With Jimmy Carter trying to do something, they said, "We won't do anything until you leave office." So they outlasted him. He left office, but the point was that they haven't changed. They're running a theocracy, and now they're running it into the ground. So we'll see what comes there. But let's now go back and take a look, if you will, at the story that we get from Deuteronomy, because we know that Deuteronomy basically means the second law. So it's kind of a restatement of what the first four or so books of the Bible all dealt with. You know, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers all dealt with some of these same issues that we hear dealt with in Deuteronomy. But now it's being told to a new generation. These kids weren't even alive, many of them, when Aaron and Miriam and Moses and all these guys got into trouble because they were off track with God. And so he sent them many times around in a circle until they all died. Now we have this new generation coming up, and they're being told some very interesting things. If they want to continue being faithful to God in their behavior, then they must, and one of the words that seems to go throughout the lessons for tonight are the words purge. They need to purge themselves of all the evil that surrounds them. So a lot of times we see the phrasing changing from I'm the Lord your God, which is what it is in most of the other books. I'm the Lord your God, and I'm the one that's deciding for you. It goes to, I want you to prepare yourselves for this new experience you're going to have, and I want you to keep yourselves faithful by purging all the influences that could lead you astray. And these influences came primarily from the occupying people that were in the Holy Land before the time of the Israelites coming in. So in the first one, in Deuteronomy 17, we have a couple of things. It says, Deuteronomy 17, 1 through 13, we have the judges. And this is kind of an interesting story that we see about the legal decisions of priests and judges. And let's see, oh yes, another thing he has to say about the way they need to behave is they don't want to go left or right. They want to go straight down the middle where God tells them to go. Don't go to the left, don't go to the right. In other words, don't mess with my law. Adhere to it as I have given it to you. And it says, and then another favorite thing. Remember we had been talking about going to the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, as they were going through the desert. Now, all of a sudden, the language changes a little bit, and it says, and you shall come to the Levitical priests. This is in 17, around 9. You shall, 8. You shall arise and go up to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Now that's interesting, because it doesn't talk about the tabernacle or the tent of meeting, because they're going to be in different communities once they go into the promised land, and each community is going to have a place where God will choose. and they will go to those places. The priests will be there, and they will confer, they will consult with the priests and the judge. So they're going to have priests and judges working in the new land, the Holy Land. They will, you go to them who is in office, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. So they're going to have judges and priests functioning as the intermediaries between the people and God. No longer are the people going to be consulting God directly. They're going to go to a place that God shall choose, and then the Levitical priests and the judges will make the decisions. Well, that's one level of society, and they also have another level. And this is interesting because if I recall correctly, this is the first time this subject is broached, and that is they will have kings. And God is not disagreeing with the concept of a king, but what he wants the king to understand is the king is subject to God. So, in other words, the king is going to be a leader of the people, but he's got limits to his leadership, and he has to know what those are. And some of those limits to his leadership are very curious and interesting. One of them, he can't be too wealthy. He can't have too much silver. He can't have too much gold. Guess what else he can't have? Too many wives. So there are restrictions for the king in his wealth. That would mean his power, right? Because with wealth goes power. And the number of wives. Aha, guess what? The influences on the king. Because some of these wives are going to be foreigners. And that's an interesting thing, the role of the woman, the foreign woman, in a married relationship. God isn't against it necessarily, but he doesn't want the influence of the foreign gods.
Foreign wife is going to bring foreign
Go ahead, speak.
Foreign wife will bring foreign gods.
That's correct. And so they have to be,
into the fold.
you got it. And they have to be very careful about that. So he's reminding them, it is better for you to take a wife from among your group, your clan, but sometimes there are circumstances where you might have a wife who is different from that, but not as a rule. Not as a rule. And generally, the only one who gets to choose those other wives is going to be the king, because they're going to have a number of wives. So it says, this statement about the foreign wives, let's see. Oh yeah, there's several other things. They have people, there are horses. He doesn't want them to have too much horses. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver or gold. So again, what does he need to have? Every king needs to, listen to this, have his own copy of the law. He needs to copy the law down, and he needs to read it again and again and again throughout his rule for as long as he is king.
Well, the thing is about...
Go ahead.
The thing is about the Israelite kings would be is the law's already there.
Yeah. They just have to copy it down.
They're not making new law.
Nope. They're copying it down.
The job is to keep the law, enforce the law.
You got it.
Now, we know how that turns out.
Yeah, we do, sadly. But again, understanding what God himself is saying, it says that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left. So you got to be a straight arrow. And this is actually Moses speaking here, sharing what he knows God wants him to hear. Okay? But I found it interesting that he even opens the possibility of a king, because God was their ruler. Remember, he was doing the pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, all the way through the desert and everything.
Right.
Now they're going to be static in a way. They're going to be in a place, in a specific place, and they're going to have leadership within that place. And the position of the king is going to be a legitimate thing at that time. Up until this time, it's always been God. So, and then he also includes Moses in his statement about these laws, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So that idea of living a long, happy life is only going to be possible if you stick to the rules that God gives you. When you start turning aside to the right or to the left, you're in trouble, and it will shorten your rule as well as your life. And so that's kind of interesting. And then he goes on in chapter 18. Okay. The concept of not turning left or right is an important one here. And then going into chapter 18, I just wanted to point out a few things. God says that he will raise up a prophet like Moses. And of course, in our study material here on our Tuesday, 10/14, 2022, that one perfect prophet, of course, is Christ. And so it's already that we're prophesying, and Moses is known as a prophet, as well as the giver of the law. And so we see a projection into the future when the Lord will raise up his own son to be that perfect prophet. So that's the message of 18. And then the other is the City of Refuge. We heard about this too. By the way, as I said, most of what you see in Deuteronomy you've heard before. In the case of the refuge cities, if you recall, we had heard already about that. Was it Numbers or something? It was recent where we heard about the refuge cities. The key to the refuge city for me is that it doesn't mean you're scot-free. You don't get away with it. You are not exonerated when you show up. You're allowed to live there until they adjudicate your case. And I think that's an important deal. In other words, when you get to the refuge city, and that's discussed here again in chapter 18, when you get to the refuge city, you check in with the leaders of the city so they know you're there, and they know that you have done something, and you explain what your story is, your side of the argument. Oh, I killed this. Oh, and the example. I think the example in chapter 18 is beautiful. So what does he say you might have done? You're out chopping wood. I can just see this happening. You're out chopping wood. The head of your axe flies off, hits your buddy who's out there working with you, hits him in the head, kills him. You didn't mean to kill him. You were both out there, trying to cut some trees down. And again, because I've seen these axes that are wood and metal, and that axe head can come off. And if it does slip off and it kills a guy, you did it, that's true, but you didn't do it intentionally. And that's the big deal when they're adjudicating. But if they find out when what we call the revenger or whatever comes from the family to get you, he tells his side of the story. If you have 2 or 3, and this is where witnesses become very important. If you have 2 or 3 witnesses that corroborate your story, you're home free. You are exonerated. But you still have to wait a while until the priest dies, and then you go home. But if those 2 or 3 witnesses agree with the revenger that you killed this guy intentionally, well, you get executed yourself. And that's just the penalty. That's the way it is. It's a life for a life, okay, at this point. And I found that quite interesting. So the introduction of the witnesses for the adjudication of the case are very important. And the setting up of judges to rule on these cases is kind of an interesting thing. Again, the movement from the peripatetic, where you're walking through the desert, to a settled place requires different kinds of rules. And that's what's happening with the refuge rules. So they have to set up their cities for refuge, but wait for the judge. You got to listen. You got to listen to the judge. There'll be 3 cities, as it says in chapter 19, and it doesn't mean exoneration. And then he gives the example of the axe head. So chapter 18, God will raise up a prophet like Moses, which we know is Christ. And then chapter 19 has to do with the city of refuge and the process of being a refugee in a way, and what you have to go through, and the idea of witnesses becomes very important. Okay. So, any comments on that? It's interesting, isn't it, that in our judicial system today, we have much the same process. You know, obviously you can be arrested, but and we know that they're going crazy with this concept, but they can let you out on bail under certain circumstances, and then you are free to return home for a while, and then you must come back for the trial, and the process of the trial with the jury and the judge, witnesses too, will determine your fate. And we haven't strayed too far from that, although they are doing some strange things to the court procedures today that I would certainly personally object to. Well.
But you also don't have a city of refuge.
Speak up, I'm sorry.
You also don't have a city of refuge.
Right, we don't.
So you release somebody, but
Yeah.
they may or may not be protected.
Exactly. And the thing is of that release now, they're getting so loose with that you have guys that actually committing murder that are getting out basically free. We saw that with the recent, where this guy ran down some kid. I can't even remember where it was, but somehow they had a political argument supposedly, and he thought the kid had to die. Go ahead, speak up.
That was in Montana.
Montana? Oh, okay.
They got a 17-year-old because he said he felt threatened.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Exactly. And again, this is a case where that concept of witness becomes very important, because obviously there was some kind of exchange between the two, and I would think that exchange was, if not recorded, it was at least seen by a group of people. We'll see what happens. I don't
well,
want
the
to.
interesting thing is, I can't, unless you're surrounded by a mob,
Yeah.
I don't see how you can feel very threatened in a pickup truck.
Oh.
The other guy's on foot.
Again,
Win that battle.
the logic is very lacking when you think about it. Just common sense.
Well, the fear I have with the breakdown in law and order, and it was
Yeah.
obvious that God knew there had to be law and order,
Yeah.
is the fact that you have what they call, blood vengeance. And the idea
Right.
behind law and order is to stop
Yeah. That method.
wholesale
Right,
slaughter
exactly.
of families by other families.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
now,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I've heard several people say in the last month is that they're very afraid you're going to start seeing the rise of vigilantes.
Yes.
And they're going to say, fine, you're not going to put these people to death that are going around killing people,
We'll do the.
and we'll do
Yeah.
it.
We'll do it. I know, and that doesn't bode well for the society. I mean, you talk about wild.
Become a real good target
Yeah.
real quick.
Wild West. I mean, that literally is the Wild West.
What scared me was, if you go back and look through the historical
Yeah.
thing of the Revolution,
Yeah.
when the Patriots and Tories were fighting in the South Carolina, the swamp fox and all
Mhm.
those people, they were going after Tories, different groups
Yes.
would attack
Yes.
the Tories,
Yes.
would attack the British.
Yep.
But if they happened to actually kill a guy that they didn't get along with, it was an accident.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the problem with
Yeah.
vigilantes.
I know, and that's really what kind of society we had during a part of that time. That's one of the poorer stories of our history. But it does raise its ugly head sometimes. And that's why the maintenance of law and order are as important as you can get. And that's why it's so hard for me as a Christian to feel anything other than terribly offended by what is happening in our society today. I mean, I've got the gun. I don't want to ever have to use it. I'm sorry, that I even was motivated to have it, but there are things about personal, defense and things in this day and age. The cops aren't going to come help you. You're on your own, and I hate to be feeling that way, but that's where I am right now. We do need to restore law and order, and I'll be happy to give away my gun. But right now, I've got it for a reason. Okay, then, this is interesting. And when we get out of 19 and into 20, this is very, very interesting. What are some of the reasons a young man would not go to war? And it really is fascinating. First of all, there might be reasons. Let's see. Let's look at 20. There are other. You can actually be. I'm sorry to call it that because we frequently use the word coward when someone is afraid to put their life at risk. But they address that issue in Scripture. And that is, if you're so fearful that you don't think that you could face the battle, we don't want you. You can go home. You're not going to have a good reputation when you get there, but you don't have to go into battle. Again, you're dangerous for everybody else.
Fear is contagious.
Oh, yeah. And also, your guy on your right and your left can't depend on you.
Right.
I don't want to go into battle that way, But the point is that that was a legitimate reason for guys to bail out. Another reason that they had for them was that they got married. They just recently got married. And so what they did was they gave them a year to be with their wife before they had to report for duty. I found that an interesting thing. Now, I don't know if I'm in the right chapter on that, but it was dealt with in one of those chapters. So there's the problem of fear. Here it is. And is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle, and another man take her. So if you either just got married or you just got betrothed and you're about to become married, then they gave you a deferment, okay? And you could go and spend a year with your wife, then come back. And is there any man who is fearful? This is chapter 20, verse 8. Is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. So that's the influence part. So not only are they not dependable, they're not good for morale by any stretch. And then they talk about besieging a city. I found this interesting. There's a very curious reference in here that you shall not, this is crazy, if you're besieging a city, you don't want to destroy the trees. How interesting and curious is that? You don't want to destroy the potential for providing for nourishment once you've taken the city.
Well, I think what God was saying there is basically, you're not supposed to destroy the land.
Right,
The
exactly.
land is to be preserved for future generations.
Right, you're not going to poison it.
Right.
Correct. Or destroy it like a tree and cutting it down or something like that. Because you want to depend on it for that. Yeah, absolutely. And also, there's another interesting admonition in this chapter, and that is, if you're going to besiege a city, first give them a chance to surrender. offer terms of peace first. That's interesting. In other words, you don't want to waste life necessarily, back to your land issue. You don't want to kill life unnecessarily. If they will accept your terms of peace, then yeah, they may end up as slaves, but they're not going to end up dead. And so you give them a choice. And then God keeps repeating all the way through this, though, I'm going to be there with you. So when you battle, when you fight, I'm there by your side. Whether you are besieging a city or you're facing your enemy on the field, they're going to have me along with you. So I want you to behave yourselves. I want you to fight. Yeah, you may lose your life. You are certainly going to try to take their lives. But I want you to know that we don't want to do it without forethought. We don't want to do it without reflection, okay? It says, in the cities, this is in 20, I think verse, where am I? 15, verse 15. Thus you shall do to the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here. But in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destructions. The Hittites, and this is where he goes to the catalog, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. So there are special cities that nobody's going to be left standing. There are other cities, when they go out to war, that they will treat differently. They will kill the men, but they won't kill the women and the children, for example. That's in chapter 20, rules of warfare and siege. And then the interesting thing, I hear, because a lot of the mystery stories that I read are about cold cases. There's a reference to cold case murders here in the chapter 21. Right. And what do you do when you have a cold case? And what they identify here as a cold case is when a body is found between cities. It's out in the hinterland. You don't know what happened. You don't know who killed the man. Usually it's a man. So what do? Well, you literally measure the distance from the body to the nearest city. And then what you have to do is set up a sacrifice for the death that occurred, as if you were responsible for it. You have to atone for it. But the atonement is done in the city nearest the body that is found. I find that interesting. So they even have a means of dealing with cold case murders. Call them unsolved murders here in my Bible. The elders of the city that is nearest the slain man shall take a heifer that has never been worked and that has not pulled in a yoke, and the elders of the city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. This is an unusual method of killing the animal, I think. It's not the same as for the kinds of sacrifices that are made for atoning for something that has been done by a community member. This is atoning, if you may say so, of the entire community for the death that occurred near their community. And it says, Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord God has chosen them to minister, to bless the name of the Lord. And by their word every dispute and every assault shall be settled. And all the elders of the city nearest the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck is broken in the valley, and they shall testify, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, so that the blood guilt be atoned for. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. So I found that to be a curious thing. I've never recalled seeing that before.
The other thing I get out of that is it's just a symbolic cleansing,
It is.
and to stop, again, anybody from taking the law into their own hands.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know exactly who did it, so we're gonna do a sacrifice.
Right. Exactly. For the atonement of that
Because
death.
the priests are involved.
Yeah. It's interesting that they state at the beginning of the atonement process that they are not guilty of this death, and we don't want innocent blood within our city to be called guilty for it, and here's our method. I mean, they have a ritual for everything. They've got so many different ways to handle unknown cases before they ever happen. I find that interesting. Then we have the interesting story about the female captives. And this is where that problem of the foreign gods can come into play. Here's what the women have to do. You bring her home to your house. She shall shave her head and pare her nails. Now that's an interesting one. Pare her nails. So they had long fingernails, obviously, back in that day. And she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house, and lament her father and mother a full month. After that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. But if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. But you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. Fascinating. And then it goes on to say, that's it. That's for that particular procedure. And then they have inheritance rights of the firstborn for people who have more than one wife. And this is interesting. This section of 21 is interesting because it introduces the concept of the loved and the unloved wife. And if you recall, in my estimation, wasn't that what Leah, what were the names of the wives? Rebecca I have loved. Was it Rebecca and Leah?
Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, who were the two wives that Jacob worked for? Jacob. Remember, he worked for his uncle, Leah, and what was the other? Rachel, that was it. Okay, Rachel I have loved. The point is that Jacob ended up having to accept the terms of Laban, his uncle, about the marriage, even though he disagreed with it. And he really loved Rachel. But Leah is the first, I believe it was, he had to marry Leah first before he married Rachel. Well, that whole issue raises the same problem here. And that is if you have a couple of wives, and if one of those wives is loved more than the other, that doesn't interfere with the right of the firstborn. In other words, if the unloved wife has the first child, that child is going to receive the inheritance, the blessing. So you can't choose between your wives because you love one and don't love the other. You have to take them in the order that they come.
That was also to keep the wives from trying to play their wiles.
Right. Yeah. Becomes a political thing, doesn't it? It really does. And with the kinds of families that we talk about here in Scripture, these were pretty well-situated families, you know.
One thing I was going to say is going back to the marrying female captives,
Yeah,
It says if you no longer want her, you can divorce her, but you can't sell her.
right. Because she's not a slave.
And you can't treat her as a slave.
Correct.
Now, that had to be way different than all the other civilizations
Oh, are you kidding me?
around it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So basically what God was telling Israel is you can't treat a woman as livestock.
Right.
You have to respect her.
Well said. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I thought was really,
Especially,
that must have raised a lot of eyebrows.
no doubt. No doubt. You know, that's a good point, though. If you ask me, one of the earliest evidences of ethics being introduced into relationships is found in Scripture. Like you said, at least we don't know about any other. They had such a wide-ranging.
One of the things I get about the New Testament, the Judeo-Christian
Mhm.
Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that there's all kinds of rules and regulations for how you treat people, period.
Right.
And not just family members,
Right.
but slaves, women you've captured,
Yep.
even livestock.
Correct. Yeah. The treatment of the animals.
Now, that's different than all the other religions that were
Yeah.
out there.
Oh, I buy that.
'Cause their
Absolutely.
religions were all tribal. You weren't a member of the tribe, you didn't count.
Right.
And if you were female, even if you were a member of the tribe, you
Yep.
really didn't count.
Right. Right.
So, the big difference I see in God was laying the groundwork that he's there for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, and that he says that from the beginning, that you will be blessed to be a blessing to the world, that, the Israelites. That
You're
is
supposed to spread that word.
right. Yeah, you're supposed to live it. You spread it in a way by showing the example of that proper way of behaving. By the way, included in that are your not the foreigners, but what are called the sojourners, the ones that come to you and live with you for a while. You want to treat them ethically as well as anybody else, strangers, in other words.
Right.
The law of hospitality, if you want to call it that, is important here. It's interesting that law of hospitality existed in other cultures, but listen carefully, because I've studied them. In those other cultures, there was a limit to hospitality. You've heard the old expression, guests and fish stink after 3 days. You weren't expected. If you were a sojourner, if you will, there was a limit to the length of time that you could actually spend with a person. If you're there for nourishment, you get nourished and you're on the road. If you're going there because you're injured or something, injury heals, you're on the road. In other words, you're not going to spend a lifetime. Literally, some of these sojourners are there for their entire lives, meaning within the community, maybe not with that family, but within the community. And there was even a status for them who were believers but weren't part of the chosen children of Israel, speaking of the blessing that they were to the world. We see examples of that in Old Testament before we ever get to the New Testament. And then we see it truly realized with Jesus and the way he was teaching them. So anyway, we have this inheritance rights of the firstborn. Let's see, I want to just read this, son. On the day that he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn in preference to the son of the unloved. That's why I wanted to make that clear, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So it's clear. Then the hard news, the really hard news, is the rebellious son. Wow. The rebellious son, following immediately upon the firstborn, is he's going to die. He's going to die. You cannot be a rebellious child, male particularly, and get away with it. It won't happen. It says if he won't listen to the voice and won't obey the voice of his father, the voice of his mother, though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of the city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death. Wow. You're not going to get away with being a bad boy.
It's like when I was talking in Sunday school the other day with the boys, I said, one of the things about the parents are supposed to act as representatives of God to the child.
Sure.
And the child doesn't, if they're disrespecting parents, it's basically disrespecting God.
Got it.
The other thing that happens is, again, as we've seen in today's society, parents are not there to exert control over the children.
Right.
The report I read last week said that 98%, I found this hard to believe, but 98% of the violent crimes that have occurred in the last 2 years have been done by people under the age of 17. Now, when they talk about violence, they're talking
Yeah.
about assaults, mostly assaults, but
Right.
also murder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, again, what God did one was the family is the whole pin that holds society together.
You got it.
And
Absolutely.
they have basically destroyed the family structure in most of these cities.
It appears that it's being done by design too. It's not just happenstance. It's not just oh my goodness, what happened here?
There was a video on Newsmax the other day of all these middle school kids just 13, 14 years old. Every one of them
Yeah.
had an automatic pistol.
Yeah.
Every one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
Where are they getting them? Even if you buy them on the black market for $200, that's $200. Where are they getting them?
Yeah.
Somebody's supplying the funds.
Yeah. And the weapons, of
And
course.
the weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think part of the answer, not,
They had 31 people shot in Chicago this past week,
Yeah.
and 5 of them killed. A 3-year-old
yeah,
and a 7-year-old
yeah,
were 2 of the victims.
not surprised. I know.
Wow.
It's crazy. I mean, just the thought of it. And some of these youngsters, the babies, many of them are so innocent. They're sitting in a car. They're in their own home, firing through the wall and killing them. I mean, it's just they don't have. I don't know.
The scary part of all this is besides breaking down the family and causing
Yeah.
a lot of other problems, is
Yeah,
you can't rehabilitate these.
yeah,
They're not fixable.
yeah,
They've learned something at the age of 12 or 13.
Yeah.
They're going to be like Billy the Kid. He
Yeah.
killed his first man at the age of 12.
yeah,
Didn't stop that.
exactly.
These kids aren't going to stop.
Yeah. Well, sadly they get eliminated by each other. I mean, basically, gang warfare.
This is getting caught in the crossfire.
I know, but the point is that when you leave children to raise children, that's one of the results, and that's what's happened. That's what's happening. In other words, there's no adult supervision whatsoever. The only way they get to feel as if they're part of the family is when they're part of a gang. And the awful rituals and things they go through to become a part of the gang, including killing people and other things, are as horrendous as you can get. I do believe, I know, that it's reaching, that's another problem with our society today and why we need prayer, among other things, ourselves. And that is that it gets to a certain point, I guess they call it a tipping point, where if it gets to that point, there's no controlling it. It's beyond control. And that's as scary as it comes, And that could, for me, as I read the news and such, I see that as one of the prime reasons people are leaving. They can get out. This is another thing. Just because you want to get out of the city doesn't mean you're going to get out of the city. You can't afford it. Many of the families, they can't even afford to go. They got no place to go. But a lot of the people that are leaving the cities are leaving it for very real reasons, and that is because of this crazy lawlessness that's going on there, and they don't want to be at risk themselves. I don't blame them. I don't blame them.
But man, it seems.
Go ahead, speak up. I gotta.
It seems to me the worst part of all this is the lack of outrage over what happens in Chicago weekend after weekend after
Yeah.
weekend. I mean, 700, 800, 900 people murdered a year in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it's just an ordinary occurrence. And I don't know how that, I don't know how our society functions like that.
Well, here's the scary
Yeah.
part, right? Chicago's already over 1,000 for the year. Philadelphia's over 1,000 murders for the year.
Yeah.
New Orleans is now the murder capital of the United States.
That's hard to believe. Yeah, but it is.
And they took over from St. Louis.
Yeah.
Now, St. Louis, because I had friends on the police force down there, that was a bloodbath.
Yeah.
They were shooting every night.
Well, that's what they're doing around the country right now.
Oh, yeah.
Seriously.
I mean, and not just shooting, stabbings.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Sexual, I mean, it was just
You name
wild
it.
in the
Yeah.
streets.
I know.
And,
Well,
and
we
it's
need.
just terrible.
Yeah. We need. First of all, we need to pray,
Oh, yeah.
and secondly, we need to act as good citizens. And when we have influence, elections, when we have an opportunity to voice our heartfelt feelings for it, we need to do that in order to change the regime. That's the only way we can do it. I don't think you're going to have a revolution. Literally, I don't think it's going to happen. You might have some people responding, vigilantes or what have you, that manner. But you're not going to make a change unless you can get rid of the people that are in leadership positions now, because they're the ones that are running the show. They're the ones that are calling the shots, and they're not under control. Excuse me, we got to go on. We're going to be here. We're going to be here all night.
I agree on one thing. I keep seeing signs around. I know he's putting them up. It
Yeah.
says Save America.
Yeah,
People don't get down on their knees and pray
yeah,
every day
right.
for God to save us.
Yep.
It isn't going to happen.
Yeah, and that's what it takes, and that's a
The other thing
change.
I was gonna say
change of
is,
heart.
And I agree with the person who told me this the other day, is
Yeah,
do acts of gratitude
yeah,
or kindness every day for other people
sure.
that self-perpetrate.
Yep.
Perpetrate
Yep,
to do acts of kindness for others, just total strangers.
yep.
Even if it's just holding the door open.
You
for
got it.
somebody.
But hold your children close too. I mean, and I'm talking about your grown children, not your babies. I'm talking about your adult children who are holding their babies close, because that's so critical. Okay. Another thing in chapter 21 that I wanted to point out was the issue of a man hanging on a tree. That a man is cursed who hangs on a tree. And of course, in a way, that's also a reference to what we're going to see Christ do. He's going to be hanging on a tree. And that the practice is that he must be taken down and buried the same day. So you just don't leave him there. And so we have the rebellious sons. We have the statement about the man on a tree being cursed. And then in 22, how to live as God's holy people. He's been giving these rules again and again. I would make a reference to the prosecution for sexual assault. This is interesting because depending on the manner and the circumstance of the assault, if it's a virgin and she doesn't cry out, if she's in a relatively public place and she doesn't cry out for help, then she and the assaulter will both die. If she is assaulted in the countryside, where even if she calls out, she can't be heard, then she is not liable there for the offense of well, what would we call it? It's not complete adultery, because this is a virgin, okay? But the point is that what is the word?
Consensual?
Yeah, this consensual sex, but there's a term for it. And I was trying to think of the word. Fornication, that was the word. She's not guilty of fornication, because even if she had cried out, she would not be able to be helped or heard. So the guy, she reports him, he dies. So that's kind of an interesting thing there on the issue. So if you have sex with your friend's wife, then that's adultery. You die, she dies. If you have sex with a virgin and she doesn't cry out for help, you die, she dies. And if you have sex with a virgin in the countryside where nobody could hear her cry out, you die. She doesn't die. All very interesting things here. Then we go on to chapter 23, and I wanted to try to get through 26 if I could, but in 23, those who are excluded from the assembly. This is a very curious thing. There's a couple of references to male genitals, and this is one. There is one reference to here that if he has crushed or he has been not just castrated, but his penis has been cut off, then he is excluded from the assembly. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then there's another reference in here. I'm trying to remember where it was.
My book says,
go ahead.
Learning Bible says
Yeah.
that the thing about no one whose testicles are crushed is male
Yeah.
organs cut off.
Yeah.
They said that was considered a sign of submission to a pagan god.
Yeah. So they did it as an act of some sort of worship.
Submission, yeah.
That's interesting. I had not known what the cause was. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I wanted to say, there was one here that says, look out for, oh yeah, that's in chapter 23. Okay, so in chapter 22, we have that issue, and on the assault. And then in chapter 23, and the cutoff, the being cut off from God's people. And then in chapter 23, we have an interesting thing. If two men get into a fight, okay, and if the wife of one of the men tries to save her man by grabbing the other man by the genitals, guess what? That's a violation. She gets her hand cut off. I found that interesting. So there are two things with genitals. One is, as you have explained, that it may have been sacrificed to some foreign god. In the other case, it's where a woman is defending her husband from another man. One thing she can't do is grab the other guy by the genitals. Pretty effective, but she can't do it. Maybe she should have kicked him there. But I found that interesting, and that's found in the next chapter. Look out what you grab. Okay. Okay. And then, oh no, I'm sorry, that was in chapter, I apologize. I'm getting my chapters all screwed up here. Women, careful what you grab, you lose a hand. That was in chapter 25. Whew. Sorry. 24, 25, I don't know which one. And they also have in there, in 24 and 25, they have certificates of divorce and the consequences of defilement. So you can give your wife a divorce by giving her a certificate. I found that fascinating. And there have to be certain other rules that have to be met when you do that to make it legit. Another thing is that they have in their marriages and millstones. There are marriage rules found in chapters 24 and 25. And an interesting thing about a millstone in 25, and that is you can't take a millstone as a pledge for a loan. There's a logical reason. That's a man's income. That is the means by which he will earn his living. So if you take the tools he needs to earn his living, it's unethical. So you can't give or receive a millstone as a pledge. And then, of course, there are the widow's rights regarding her dead husband's brothers. If there is a brother living, then he is obligated to take that sister-in-law into his household as his wife. And if they have a child, the first child that they have by that marriage becomes the child of the dead brother. That's the thing that Onan loses his life for. Remember earlier when he spills his sperm? You have to give that wife a chance to propagate and give the credit to her first husband. So that's an interesting thing. And like I said, the last interesting fact that I got out of chapters 25 and 26 was you don't want to grab a guy by the genitals if he's in a fight. Let him fight. And the whole purpose of all this comes to a nice conclusion in chapter 26, a kind of conclusion, and that is, you should do what you promise the Lord you will do. This has to do with vows, particularly. If you make a vow, you follow through with it, because that proves, if you keep the vow that you've made to the Lord, that proves that you love the Lord. You've made this promise to him, and you've kept your promise. And that shows that you're part of his holy people. That's very important. And then there's always this statement, you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God as he promised. All of these rules and regulations, as I see them in these chapters that we've just covered, are having to do with being holy to the Lord your God, and he will keep his promise to you. So how important is that? And the other thing that I said that's an important, significant other person in a man's life are the sojourners, the fatherless, and the widows. Also in these chapters, and I can't recall which chapter they are now, sorry about the memory, but it has to do with the gleaning. In other words, when you go over your field, if you miss a portion of your field in your harvest, you can't go back and redo it. You have to leave it for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. They have the rights to what you have not yourself harvested on your first attempt. So you don't want to leave anything out there. If you do, you automatically give it to someone else. Not that it's wrong. I mean, that's probably the right thing to do. And we, of course, hear about that with Boaz and Ruth, remember? It's coming up. But I think that's important. The other thing is, let me see, what was that I wanted to say? Oh, yeah. Man, oh, man. Another thing slipped my mind. Do what you promised to do. There was something else in that chapter 26. Oh, just some of the general things. When you're talking, when Moses is giving his rules, in many, many chapters, he goes back to the issue, you were slaves in Egypt. The Lord guided you out of that. Don't go back to it. Don't go back to become a slave or treat anybody else who is not a slave, your sojourners, your fatherless, your widows. Don't treat anybody else as a slave unless they are actually a slave, period. Okay? So you want to be able to live a life that indicates, again, your relationship with God. And a lot of that has to do with any kind of promises that you make. Okay, and then I'll just read that last paragraph of chapter 26. This day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and rules. You shall therefore be careful to do them with all, this is important, with all your heart, with all your soul. You have declared today that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes and his commandments and his rules and will obey his voice. And the Lord has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession, as he has promised you, and that you are to keep all his commandments, and that he will set you in praise and in fame and in honor, high above all nations that he has made, and that you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised. That's a very important thing. And if you are one of God's people, you should live like it. You should act like it. You should behave like it. And that's a blessing to the world. It's a blessing to you. It's a blessing to the world. Sorry I have taken so much of your time.
Time well wasted.
Go ahead. What?
It's time well wasted.
I think it's very well wasted, but I don't want to dominate. I've dominated tonight. I don't mean to do that.
It sounds a cliche to say it, but every time I go through, because I've read some of this stuff, not all of it.
Yeah,
In the past, I learned something new.
yeah,
So,
absolutely, and I'm glad that we do. Okay, let's go ahead and close with the Lord's Prayer, and we'll set you free. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we have forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And we'll break it down, I guess, tonight, as we normally do. I thank you for that assistance. Thank you. And if there are any additional study guides that you'd like to turn in, go ahead and do it.
I'll take this one from Tom.
Oh, okay, take it.